Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a pivot table and a pivot chart. And I'm also going to show you how to work with pivot table and pivot chart features that allow us to analyze data. Now I've opened up the Learning Files workbook and I'm on the Technology Equipment Inventory worksheet. Now I'd like to start by talking about what a pivot table is. A pivot table is an interactive table that summarizes data in the way that you specify. Pivot tables have built-in filters that allow the table to change or pivot as needed. Now, the first step in building a pivot table is to have a spreadsheet that is neat, organized, and clear. And it's very important that the spreadsheet that you're working from has column headers that make sense. So in this spreadsheet, my column headers are supplier name, shipping method, technology category, current location, quantity in stock, and price. And when we start building our pivot table, you'll see why those are important. So after we've verified that our spreadsheet is perfect for a pivot table because it's neat, it's organized, and it's got valid column headers, we click anywhere in that spreadsheet and we click on the Insert tab and click on Pivot Table. That opens up the Pivot Table from Table or Range window. Now you need to think about two things in this window. You need to verify the range that's being selected to create your pivot table. Now this says it's using the Technology Equipment Inventory worksheet, and it's using cells A2 through F52. And that's correct. That's what I want. I also have to choose where I want my pivot table to be placed. My choices are in a new worksheet or in the existing worksheet. I don't like doing it on the existing worksheet because it makes the spreadsheet too busy. So I'm going to go with new worksheet and click OK. Now, a couple of things happened when I clicked OK. First of all, I'm on a new spreadsheet and it says sheet 1 right here. And that spreadsheet is always positioned to the left of the spreadsheet that we started working from. I have this area right here in my spreadsheet, and this is where my pivot table is going to populate. And I also have pivot table fields on the right-hand side of my screen. And this is where my column headings come into play. Notice my pivot table field names match my column heading names. This is why it's important to have column headings that accurately identify the information in each column. Now, building your pivot table is easy. You just click and drag your field names into the grid below. So I'm going to put my supplier name as a filter. That places it here in the top left corner of the spreadsheet. And if I click the filter tool, I can see all my supplier names. I'm going to use toy category as my rows. So that places a row heading for each category in that column. I'm going to use current location as my column headers. So by dragging that in this part of the grid, I now have a column header for each location available. And I'm going to use quantity in stock as my value. Now, the only rule when building a pivot table is that in the values slot, you have to use numbers. So my choices would be my quantity in stock or my price. Now let's look at the pivot table. I have a filter tool for each item I dropped into the grid, except values. So supplier name, I can click on that drop arrow and I can choose which supplier I want to view data from. So if I choose educational technology and hit OK, there's all my educational technology data. Okay, I know I've filtered by this category because I can see the little filter tool in the top corner of my drop menu. I'm going to go back to all. If I click my row labels filter tool, I can see all my options and I can filter out by that category. So I'm going to uncheck select all. I'm going to choose computers, monitors, printers, and tablets, and click OK. So now I only see those items. I know I've filtered by my row labels because I can see that filter tool. I'm going to clear them, bring my data back. And I could also filter by my column labels. So if I only wanted to see items from specific places, I could select them. Let's say Boston, New York, and Providence. There I go. And I'll bring that data back. All right, let's look at the data in this pivot table. So I'm just going to put some borders around my data and center it so that it's easier for you to read. So I'm going to put an all border and I'm going to center it. Okay, so according to this pivot table, I've got 66 bags in Boston, 454 in Chicago, 55 in Hartford, 125 in LA, 10 in New York, and those add up to a grand total of 710. So by default, pivot tables come with a grand total for each row category and column category. Okay, so I know that in Boston, I have a total of 861 items in stock. Okay, in Chicago, I've got 774. Now, let's say I want to change my pivot table around. Okay, let's say instead of current location as my column header, I'm going to make it my filter. And I'm going to take supplier name out of there. And let's make my column header. Now, I don't need a column header. I could analyze my data with just these two if this is all I wanted to see. But let's say I wanted to make my column headings shipping method. Okay, so I can change this up as much as I want. I can even put more than one filter category in the grid. So let's say under tech category, I want to see shipping method. See how that changes my table? Okay, so for bags, I know that this many shipped by air, this many shipped by rail, this many by road. And I know that the total of them all is 710. Okay, if this doesn't work for me, I can change it out again. Okay, let's say I want to see what I have by location. Okay, so now I know that in Boston, I've got 66 bags that were shipped by rail. Okay, I've got 288 that were shipped by air, 166 by rail, for a total of 454. Okay, so that's the beauty of a pivot table. You can change it up however you want just by clicking and dragging. You don't have to worry about messing it up because if you make a mess out of it, you can always just click and drag it back to the way that you want. Now, once you've built a pivot table, a pivot chart is simple. You just click on your Insert tab and choose Pivot Chart. And you can choose the style of chart that you want. I'm going to go with the column in 3D. Now notice I didn't have to select any data to display in my pivot chart. That's because my pivot chart is connected to my pivot table. So when I filter an item in my pivot table, it's going to reflect in my pivot chart as well. So let's try it. For current location, let's say I want to see stuff in Boston. I'll hit OK. Notice they both filtered out. If I clear that filter, I can clear it from my pivot chart or my pivot table. So I'll clear it from my pivot chart and I'll show all. Okay, let's say I only want to see things that were shipped by air. I can choose shipping method, uncheck select all, and ship by air. And there they are. And if I want to bring all my data back, again, I can clear my filter. So I want to point out that when my pivot chart is selected, I have pivot chart fields. When my pivot table is selected, I have pivot table fields. Now, if I change up my data by dragging and dropping different things into the grid, it's going to affect both of them. Okay, so let's say I'm going to take current location out of my filter window and put supplier name back. And I'll take shipping method out of my columns and put current location back. Okay, we saw the change in both items. Okay, so that's building a pivot table and a pivot chart and utilizing the filter tools embedded in both to analyze data. Now in the next video, we're going to work with options on the pivot table and pivot chart contextual tabs.